It's our panel this afternoon. For those who don't know me, I'm Martin Dempsey, here with User Vision. I think all of us who go to any of these events know that you can't turn around right now, but AI isn't the number one topic of conversation. And the reason for that really is that I've yet to find an organisation that's really settled on what the future of AI looks like for them. It's still something that's very much a moving target. There's compliance and regulation coming, there's opportunities coming, there's risks coming, and it makes it really challenging for everybody to plant their feet and make confident decisions. So the purpose of our panel this afternoon really is to look at the future of AI through the lens of UX and accessibility, and to think about what it means in our world. How do we approach it? What are the opportunities? How do we access it in a way that is inclusive, and the impact that that then makes on design for the digital landscapes in the next few years. So I'm not going to say anything more because we've got three fantastic speakers. I'll start by introducing Abi from Microsoft to kick us off, and I'm not going to steal the thunder any further.
Great. Well, hi. Yeah, Abi Reynolds. I know some of you, I think, before. Thanks, Stephen. Okay, yeah. So, hi, yeah, I'm Abi. And I guess I'll be talking a little bit about what does a future AI enterprise look like from a Microsoft perspective. So, who am I? Well, I did actually work with the fine folk of User Vision about 5 years ago. That's probably why I recognize a couple of you. I was a consultant back then. Then I went to the oldest financial institution in the UK, that is Jessica's current employer, Lloyds and Scottish Widows. And then I kind of jumped there to one of the oldest, but only 15 years old, cryptocurrency exchanges, which was the other side of technology, Kraken, which is a great organization to work for. And then just recently, since the summer, I've joined Microsoft, Senior Strategic UX Researcher, whatever that means. But we'll speak a little bit more about that. And I work in the Experience Strategy and Design Studio within Microsoft, and we work for the Global Customer Success Unit, which is important because it means that we work for enterprises, not the end user, if you like. So and I'm within that, if you kind of drill down, because Microsoft's quite a big company, I work for this program called the AI Accelerator. So what we do is we work with industry partners and we run workshops, design workshops, to help them think about what are the kind of key strategic AI use cases they need to think about to become more of an AI-driven type organization. And I guess what I'm going to speak to today, I think that's probably the next slide there, is the backdrop to our program, the AI Accelerator, within the Global Success Org in Microsoft, is this strategy, which I think kind of an interesting thing maybe to bring to the table. It's Microsoft's workplace strategy of how they see what the future AI transformational company looks like and how to get there, basically. They call it the frontier firm. So Microsoft's kind of bet big on AI. They've pivoted to kind of promote AI within, we call ourselves Customer Zero, so we use AI ourselves. And also it's a big thing, obviously, with customers. And it's kind of a blueprint of what we use internally to think about how we transform ourselves and also how our customers can kind of move through and mature. It's kind of like a maturity framework. There's two maybe core components to this strategy. I mean, and if you're interested, go look it up. It's online. One is about this thing called intelligence on tap. So it talks about AI becoming this very kind of utility resource throughout the organization, that it's not necessarily a thing one person does, it's just there. And then the second big thing, which will be much more pertinent, I guess, to our conversation today, and Jessica kind of teed some of this up earlier. Thanks, Jessica, stealing my thunder. It's okay. It talks about the human agent team and the hybrid, kind of how we're going to be working with agents or chatbots or bots in the future. I mean, just think about it. As somebody said to me the other day, we might be the last generation to have just a purely human workforce, which is kind of interesting. And what does that look like? And one other thing, I guess, next slide, please, Steve. We're talking about the human agent team, what that's going to look like in the future. This is what Microsoft uses internally and externally to kind of gauge where different organizations are. It talks about phase one, where I think a lot of us are. We use it as an assistant or as an eager intern, as was mentioned earlier. You would, as a researcher, design researcher, previously, I would use it as a research tool where I look at a transcript or I do some summarizes or surveys. You're kind of using that as assistant. A lot of us are there, and a lot of the enterprises I work with, people are using it and within work, and some aren't. Even quite a few organizations still not even using that aspect. The next phase or frontier part, where Microsoft see it going, is the human-led agents. This is more about the agents doing more stuff. So it's not just an assistant. It's, I guess, we all know that customer support, you kind of see that there's a lot of back and forth. There's agents, but also they're actually doing tasks. They're like sending emails, or if you've got some sort of employee self-service agent, which is very popular, they can do kind of the low-risk workflow, like sending emails, the very kind of common tasks. That's the second phase, kind of agents. We hear a lot about agentic workforce. That's where I'd say quite a few of the firms I've seen in the short time, or even looking back at our team, are in phase one and phase two maybe. And then phase three is the human-led agent operated. This is kind of how you work with agents within a team. And you mentioned that earlier as well, Jessica. It's all about the orchestration, how different collaborators in a team work, whether it be agent or human, and how we manage that and how we collaborate. And very often the example of something like that would be a supply chain, where you'd have an agent who maybe does inventory, and then you've got an agent who does supply, and they're a bit more autonomous. So, they talk to each other and do kind of more complex workflows. And then two things maybe to point out in this that Microsoft talk about a lot, and is pertinent again to this conversation, is that humans are at the core of all of this. It's pitched as not replacement, but more enablement. It's about, augmenting workflows. It's about automating the dull stuff, but keeping the stuff that brings you joy, the creativity, etc. And then, the importance of having, again, a phrase that was mentioned earlier, the human in the loop. And I guess we'll talk about that very much today, in terms of the judgment, the decision-making, the quality, the strategic direction. Sure, agents will help us get there, but we still need to decide where there is, right, in terms of AI. And then two kind of observations maybe to talk about, to bring to the panel, discussed earlier today as well. So if becomes more like agentic work and interfaces disappear, and we're designing for agents, what does that mean for us as designers in the room? If you're designing for agents, how do we keep kind of human needs and kind of at the core of that, and empathy? We still need to think about the end user, even if it's an agent that's kind of in between. And then the other one, because this is what I've been dealing with in the last couple of months, is what does the shape of the future organization look like? What skills are needed, not needed? What do teams look like? How do we organize that? Is the old kind of, if you read this strategy, it talks about, you swarm around workflows that the work organization will go. How do we think about enterprise kind of makeup of the future, and how do we get ahead of all of that as designers? Like, where do we fit in all of that? I think personally, I think people are kind of interested in, but also as designers, making sure that human needs are still at the center. Two observations, and I'll stop there. Thanks, Steve.
Super. I suspect most of you know Steve, so take it away.
Thank you. Well, in case you don't, my name is Steve. I'm UX Director and Director of Consulting here at Uservision. So I'm a researcher at heart. I started life as a developer, a computer scientist, and quickly discovered that what I really got a buzz out of doing was helping to solve problems and to shape experiences, and the coding was a bit of a means to an end. I didn't get too excited by the many late nights debugging code, so I don't miss that too much. But I've been focusing exclusively on usability and UX since about 2005. And I guess the nice thing about panels is that there's two things. Everybody comes with a slightly different perspective on a subject. So we're not kind of deep diving on one area, but we're kind of thinking about, different lenses to look at this space through. And also, we don't necessarily come with fully formed answers. I think this is as much about raising questions and discussing perspectives as it is about saying, this is the definitive truth. And I think I'd probably speak for everybody here to say none of us would call ourselves AI experts. Certainly not myself. Maybe.
No, yeah. Not an expert in anything, Steve.
It's the way to be. But I think we're all, everybody in the various rooms around the building today, we're all approaching this with questions, trying to work out how it fits into our disciplines, into our profession. So I guess the perspective I'm coming with is, we've talked a lot about kind of how we utilize AI as a way to augment and supplement what we do. I guess I'm thinking about it from the perspective of as UX professionals, researchers, designers, architects, whatever, we are trying to ultimately design experiences for customers. And many of those experiences now have an AI element in there. So, how do we approach that? How do we deal with both the challenge and the opportunities that brings? And I think we'd all agree that every product succeeds or fails based on the experience that it delivers. So we know that experience is crucial, and I don't think throwing AI into the mix changes that. It just changes the context in which we're trying to shape and design that experience. And in the AI context, I think that usability in UX is still a key differentiator, and it will be a key differentiator to the business outcomes, because ultimately AI is being integrated into, I think, we've all come across kind of every digital tool has to have AI somewhere in the title. And some of it is kind of language model AI, some of it is actually not AI, it's just a clever piece of code that's been labeled AI. But the usability and the experience that gives is still going to be really crucial. And I think as with any features, if there's features that cause confusion or alienate users, that's going to erode trust, that's going to increase churn, it's going to raise support calls and costs. So really nailing the usability of any AI-enabled product or service is really crucial. And I think if we get it right and shape it around the human needs, then it's going to create differentiation and loyalty, and that's going to turn into the measurable business return. But I thought I was looking back a bit at kind of a potted history of the discipline of UX, and I thought it was really interesting because you can go back to the early 1900s, the Industrial Revolution, and you had all of this new equipment and machinery going into factories to improve productivity, and very much humans were kind of the cogs in the machine. And then in the 1940s, Toyota started coming up with this concept that actually if you involve the workers in the work they're doing and the machinery, the technology of the time that they're having to interact with, then you can make that process more efficient, and the users of it are going to be more engaged with it, and it's going to be more successful. And then 1950s started getting this idea of bringing usability into industrial design, and there's a guy called Dreyfus who did a lot of stuff around actually how do you improve the ergonomics and the usability of industrial design. Disney in the 60s got this idea of knowing your audience and then creating experiences based off that. And I think, UX, if we'd been around in the 1950s working for Disney, we'd have been called Imagineers. It's just labels for the same kind of thing. In the 70s, computers coming into the offices and the homes, Xerox and Apple leading the way on new GUIs, and that's when usability and software usability became a big thing. And the very first UX person, Don Norman, user experience architect, he was the first person with UX in his job title in the mid-90s for Apple. And if you've read any of his books, he developed this idea of it being more than just straight usability, it's about developing an experience. And then since 2007, we've seen, obviously, smartphones, cloud, VR, AR, and various other technology shifts. But I would argue that throughout all of this, the role of the people doing our job at those stages in time was the same. It's about understanding the users. It's about understanding how they work, how they live, how they behave, how they think, and then shaping experiences around them. Breaking down user experience, it's the same things. It needs to be useful, it needs to be usable, it needs to be engaging in some way, it needs to be accessible. So a positive user experience is a positive user experience irrespective of the technology that it's based on. So there's always new challenges and there's always new technology. And I think user-centered design, research and testing are as essential with what we're doing with AI-enabled products as we've been with anything. It's about uncovering trust and building transparency and helping to understand comprehension gaps to deliver the best experience. And I noticed that the EU AI Act that came out recently is kind of catching up with what I think UX people have known for a long time, that trust is a core foundation to usability and to the experience. And we're not going to get into this, but I think the key thing here is that they've talked about defining the risk of particular AI models, but crucially building in transparency. And we know that if people don't trust what they're interacting with, it actually increases cognitive load because they're kind of doing self-checking all the time. So if we can build trust into the AI-enabled products through transparency about what it's doing, then that will reduce cognitive load, and that will then increase usability, increase experience. So I guess the key thing I'm saying is, if we look at, this is the good old ISO 9241 human-centered design process, which I'm sure you're all intimately familiar with. But this stuff's not rocket science. Understand the context of use, understand what users are all about, specify those requirements from a user perspective, produce the design solutions, test against the requirements, and keep doing it until you've got something that meets the user requirements. And I think just when we layer AI on this, there's just things we need to do. Consider ethical considerations, which I know Snigdha's going to talk about in a second. Look at where we can mitigate bias in the context of use. Make sure our requirements are research-driven, and we understand the expectations and the mental models that our users are coming with. We involve users in the design process through co-design. We bake in that transparency and that inclusivity. And then we test, but I think we need to test both the effectiveness of the model, but also the experience that the user has in interacting with the model. So the model needs to give the right outputs, the right responses, but we also need to look at testing the way, that interaction with the model. So I think there's kind of two layers to that, and then measuring the value and the trust. So I don't think it's rocket science, and I guess that's all I wanted to say in a very probably long-winded way, is that I don't think this is necessarily anything new. Every leap in technology has made usability even more important than it was before, and I think AI is no different. We're just looking at the next technology shift. Thank you. I'll hand over to Snigdha.
Thanks, Steve. Hi everyone, I'm Snigdha. I'm a senior accessibility consultant here at UserVision. And what I do is help organizations make sure their services are more accessible. I started out in computer science. Like Steve, I realized that coding was not my thing. I enjoyed working with humans more. And this field is a really nice in between where I get to have the tech background, but then I'm working with people. Now, before I realized this, I was doing an internship when I was still an undergrad. And as you do when you're bored and you want to make a change in your life, I just decided to cut my hair really short. Now, at this internship, I was working with a team where we were using computer vision to build this facial recognition and pattern recognition software. Cut my hair short, the first thing my manager says to me when I walk into the room is, "Oh, now your system's going to think you're a boy." And it was meant to be funny, but it's not completely baseless because the way we were training our data, the way gender classification was being done at the time, most of the photos of women in our training set did have long hair. And to really simplify how AI works, it would then identify, okay, long hair is a feminine characteristic, so short hair means not female. And this goes to show how the data we use, when it doesn't reflect the actual diversity in our user base, it can then impact the actual outcome. So an example I want to talk about, and I'm sure most of us have heard about it, because I think this is something that really sparked the conversation about digital AI bias, data bias, was when in 2015, Google Photos had its really nice piece of AI software, which was good at detecting someone from your photos. It was really good at detecting gender, the age, and exactly who this person was based on your list of contacts. The caveat being, it worked really well if you were white. If you were a person of color, sometimes it wouldn't even recognize if you were human. And because it worked so well on the training database where with white people, it had a really high accuracy score. So it wasn't until later that they even realized, well, I say realized, but it wasn't publicly acknowledged until there was pushback, until there was outcry about the bias that existed. Another example, do you all remember when every voice assistant, AI assistant out there was female? Siri, Alexa, Cortana. Now, there is a good reason for this. This is because the training data that was used at the time, it was based on telephone operators during World War II and post-World War II. And most of them were women. So the data they had to work with was female data, and hence, the output reflected that. Now, the problem here is the way these assistants worked. They were meant to assist, meant to support, meant to be nice, things that are seen as traditionally feminine. And this resulted in the self-perpetuating stereotype that these roles are more feminine, and this AI is sort of emphasizing those same points. And what's really interesting is when IBM came out with its agent, which is meant to be your colleague, your co-worker, it's going to be working at your level. This was given a more masculine role, IBM Watson. And these self-perpetuating stereotypes, these biases in data, in AI, these have led to many problems. And in education, in healthcare, it's led to people being falsely incarcerated, people not being given visas because of the data. There are a lot of problems because of these data biases. I'm not blaming AI. It can't think, it can't feel, it's not making these mistakes. This is based on years of systemic injustice and inequality based on actual human experience. All AI is doing is holding up a mirror to society, and it's not a very good reflection. However, on a positive note, AI can definitely be used well, and from an accessibility perspective, we're seeing lots of positive changes. You have AI that helps blind people interact with their surroundings better by using computer vision. You have sign language translators, you have content that makes language easier for people. So you have all these positive benefits, but you also have drawbacks that we all know about as well. AI can hallucinate, it tries to please you, and despite all the years of effort, despite all of these problems being known, there are still biases out there. So an example is, yesterday I asked ChatGPT, generate alt text for this image to be used on a web page about charity initiatives. This was the first image I gave it. And the alt text was, children in a classroom sit together on a colorful rug, taking part in a video call with another group of children as part of a learning and community activity. Okay, yeah, seems fine. This was the second image. Very similar in the sense that it's still kids sitting on the floor, it's still a teacher, they're still looking at a screen. But the alt text generated was, teacher conducting an interactive learning session for school children in a rural classroom, supported by charity volunteers using digital tools for education. So it is still prone to bias. In both cases, it has made information up because all it had was the picture and the domain. It's making information up in both cases to sort of answer my query. But the thing is, despite these images being similar, the outputs are quite different. In one instance, it's talking about the colorful rug. It's a learning and community activity. Whereas in the other, rural classroom, supported by charity volunteers, it's almost shifted the focus from teaching to the second picture where it's just recipients of aid. And it's not just sociocultural biases that exist. In terms of disability, even now, if you ask ChatGPT to give you a story about a disabled person, it's almost inevitably going to give you something that's almost like inspiration point. It's about a person who's triumphing despite their disability. Whereas if you ask it to give you a story about, say, a school kid or an office worker, it's going to try and generate something funny, something romantic, something with a moral in it. And at the outset, it doesn't seem too bad. Yeah, this is a positive story about a disability, but then it's almost using that disability as a prop for inspiration. It's not recognizing it as a person's actual characteristic. This is just a plot point in someone else's life. Now, obviously, the answer to this is not to stop using AI, and at this point, I don't think we could, even if we wanted to. It's everywhere. But we do need to be more critical about what it's producing, what's out there. We know that these gaps exist. We know that biases still exist. And it's our job not to stop using AI, but to recognize these flaws, to be critical, and try to bridge the gaps wherever possible. Now, it might not be possible for us to go to a data center and start feeding it more data. But as researchers, this means that, well, you shouldn't trust AI anyway too much, but it means that we need to involve people we know are being excluded. In terms of accessibility, that means including disabled people as part of the research. In user research, it's making sure that it's not limited to your ideal user. You're talking about sociocultural diversity. Your research needs to be intersectional. It needs to involve people across all age groups. It also needs to include disabled people. So knowing these gaps helps us bridge them better. And I think I want to end with this really good, strong quote from the disability community is, nothing for us without us. And as researchers, as people in this field, that's something we definitely have the power to do. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. So we'll do some questions from the room to give you time to think of questions. I'm going to fill that gap by peppering our panel with difficult questions. Steve's going to get really difficult questions.
Start with him.
Yeah. Steve, name the Partick Thistle lineup in the 1971 World Cup final. No. Abi, I was interested what you were talking about as you move to a more agentic world and how that changes the interaction for the human and adds to the importance of designing empathy and creating a human-centred solution to that. From a research perspective, where should organisations be directing their energies just now? What are the questions they should be asking, and what should they be thinking about?
So, sorry, Martin, just to understand your question. So, what should we think about in design research, or what should we focus on enterprise-wise, or?
Yeah, so that for organisations that are preparing for this change in their operating model, change in their engagement model, how can they prepare themselves as an organisation for the friction they might experience and de-risk that transition?
Right. So I guess even to make it a little bit bigger, I mean, how do you prepare in general, right, for kind of the AI company of the future? And I think there's a couple of different things there. You know, like when we're dealing with enterprises, a lot of things, core issues they face is around data, you know, straight off. Like there's a lot of trying to backfitting AI into systems, which doesn't work. Process readiness, things like that, you know, defining elements of that, and the governance and the ethical considerations. I mean, it's a change process, right? It's a transformation via AI, basically. So I think you would address it in any way, a change process by, and particularly with design research, I think it's going to be very important for us as researchers to think about, like, how do we add value? And it'd be good to hear, like, from other people, like, where do you see the role of design? I mean, personally, I think it's going to become a little bit more strategic. I think it's going to be really important that we join the dots, that we're kind of the voice of the customer, that we kind of show the end-to-end journeys and kind of bring that to the forefront, because I think some companies get very excited about AI and they think they can AI away lots of elements of it. It's not all about efficiency. It's about, as Steve was talking about earlier, it's about the experience. It might change slightly. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Martin, but how companies think about it. I mean, Microsoft has a maturity framework where you kind of think about, well, there's you still start with the human needs and what are the business needs, I guess. That's kind of the answer. When we run these workshops, we do a lot of research with the companies as to what are the kind of core processes and needs, or how might we, what are your challenges, what are your opportunities, and then how might we use AI to help that out. And there's two sides of it. There's the back end, all the operational stuff always comes up. How do we improve legal, financial, HR, etc.? Then there's the front end stuff. And that's a little bit more tricky because, you know, we just recently did a workshop with media. They don't want to AI all of that creativity away, you know, because that's what they do. So I think it's thinking about, you know, as usual, you know, what you're trying to achieve as a company, what are the challenges and opportunities, and where can AI add value, and which workflows are the ones that are good for AI and which workflows are not so good for AI, and how you need to have a strategy around that, really, I think. And I'll stop there. Yeah.
Thanks, Abby. I guess it's that thing of just because a company can do something doesn't mean they always should.
Yeah.
You know, and there's always that resistance from people where the experience. I guess my completely facile example of this is I've got a 16-year-old at home with a Spotify account who spends most of his pocket money every month on vinyl records.
Yeah.
Do you know? And sometimes people like the world moving at a certain pace, and in some parts of their life, but they want to slow it down in other parts. And it's retaining that humanity in the way that businesses operate, engage with their customers. Steve, you talked about the importance of trust in AI tools, and I guess trust in any new technology solution that organisations provide. What can organisations do from a UX perspective to earn some of that trust?
Yeah, I think, and again, as I say, I don't think this is a new challenge we're seeing. It's a new context, but it's the same challenge of how do you get a customer base, an audience comfortable with interacting, using a different kind of interaction paradigm than they were using before. And I think trust is a really interesting aspect, particularly when it comes to AI, because it hits in a couple of different levels. You've got obviously from an overall user experience, customer experience perspective, you need your customers to trust you. You have to have credibility, and that trust is built by their interaction with every touch point. So that really needs to be nailed. But as I mentioned earlier, we've also got this challenge that if users don't feel confident in what they're doing, if they don't trust the interaction that they're having, then that increases cognitive load, and that then affects usability. So yes, we want them to trust the organization, but they also need to have confidence in the interaction they're having in order to be able to do it effectively and efficiently. And I think some of the things that can be done here, particularly around AI, a lot of it's around communication at the moment. There's a lot of mixed messages. There's a lot of scaremongering or uncertainty around what AI is doing. So having some transparency about this is what it's doing, this is how we're using it, this is what's happening with data, but also how you interact. So the visibility of the AI behavior. You know, how do you interact successfully with it? You know, I think there's been a lot of people talking now about how you get more effective with, you know, prompt engineering and stuff like that. I think for a lot of our customers, it's not necessarily going to that level, but they need to know how to interact. They're coming with mental models, and this is a new mental model they're having to pick up. So we need to look at what their expectations are, and then how do we then shape that experience so that it doesn't jar with the mental model, but it builds upon it. I think the last thing I say is just about the same thing we do with any product and service design. It's about co-design, participatory design, involving users in the process, so that we are discovering this stuff as we're going through, because it's so new and changing so quickly that, you know, we could design it in one way, and actually by the time something's launched, the whole landscape shifted. So doing that participatory design and testing early and often throughout means that we're more likely to be on the mark by the time something is pushed out to the users.
Thanks. It's like you talked about something that's come up in plenty of news stories about the bias that sits within lots of these LLMs. In the face of that, what can organisations do from a design and a usability perspective, I guess, to guard against that?
So the first thing is recognize that bias exists, but also have enough diverse voices in that process where you're using AI to make sure you're not unintentionally baking something in that was biased. And this is a bit to Steve's point, where you want to build trust in the system, and you're not asking people to just blindly trust whatever AI is saying, but have it build trust by being clear where that data is coming from, being clear enough to be able to recognize those gaps. So what organizations can and should do is recognize that those gaps exist and try to bridge them through research, through participatory design, through involving other people, by making sure that the voices that aren't going heard right now still do come out through human experiences. Yeah.
Any questions in the room?
Abi, I really enjoyed the chat that you had there about the agentic AI. One thing that was kind of going through my mind whenever you were talking about this was the human in the loop for each agentic project. And then I kind of thought about myself, and I was like, oh God, how many projects do they expect me to actually maintain? So I was wondering, is that kind of drawing you at all? Because, you know, whenever I'm in a project, sometimes I can make AI do a lot of the actual grunt work.
Yeah.
And if that becomes a reality, that I can make it do like 95% of the grunt work. How many projects does a human manage? Like, what sort of way does a human interact with an enterprise at that stage? Do I have to manage like 25 projects?
You expect me to have that answer?
And it's something you guys are considering, like, you know, the amount of workload that the human should be able to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it kind of touches on a much bigger topic, right, about kind of work and roles and how we all fit in and the blurring between different jobs and all of that, right? So, and a bit to the second point I was talking about, what's the shape of the organization? What are people expect? You know, we talk to kind of CTOs and head of innovation hubs and people managers, and they're thinking, what skills are needed, what skills are not needed. Because let's be real, right? You know, a lot of people are talking about efficiency straight off. That's the first thing, AI. But then I think the more mature you get with it, it's not just about efficiency, it's about value. It's like, what value can you bring? So the human in the loop, hopefully, here is you as to what works for you, I guess. Because I think there is a bit of a messy bit where, and with all these agents running wild everywhere, you know, doing different things, out of control. I think, you know, that's the messy bit of design initially, until we bring it back down and really figure out which bits work for us, which bits we can automate that we can then focus on, you know, bringing real value. But I don't know is the answer to that. I think it's only through, you know, we're talking about like experimentation, having a learning mindset, trying to kind of stay ahead, go with it, fail, all those really nice kind of change things that we'll find out. But I mean, Microsoft talk about being an agent boss. Now, what that looks like, I'm afraid we have to see.
Excited. Cheers.
Anybody else?
Anyone else? For what it's worth, it was a really entertaining article in Wired last week about a guy who set up a startup company with half a dozen agentic employees that he created. And he even gave them voices and they could phone him and stuff like this. And his AI CTO phoned him to give him a project update. And opened the call by saying that he'd been talking to Megan, one of the other staff. And the guy's going, hang on a minute, my AIs are talking to each other behind my back. And the CTO hallucinated a whole pile of stuff. And it kind of gave him pause, having thought, this is the future. And then, you know, maybe the future's not quite there yet. Anything from this side? No.
I think the only thing I'd say is that I think the only thing I'd say very quickly is that I think I see our roles doing this isn't about how we juggle all the projects, but I think we'd see more of a fundamental shift in our roles from making to shaping, and being able to a lot of that making stuff can have some agentic input, but I think our role then shifts to the shaping and the mapping that to the research, the expectations, and all that stuff.
It's interesting because I think that our roles are going to slip towards being more editorial than creators. But one thing that I kind of enjoy right now is the fact that I've got complete and utter. I feel like the manager who's on top of the intern is like not this way, you know, and you've got complete and utter control over. And you've got a really good output at the end. If you have that,
You're the agent boss, then that's it.
Yeah.
I don't want any more projects.
Speak to the CTO, Miss CTO.
Any other questions here? I should say, if anyone up the stairs has got any questions, you've got about 90 seconds to run down the stairs. No, any other burning thoughts?
I had a question for people. I mean, and I know Jessica, you mentioned this. Where do you all think the role of designer is going? Like in this, I mean, you mentioned a little bit, like you kind of got different agents working for you, but what do you all think about AI and design and where that all goes?
From what I've seen so far, we're not under threat yet.
Not under threat. Okay.
Yet. As you say, it changes all the time, gets better. But we've done quite a lot of experimenting work just with the AI that you can get from Figma or whatever, different programs. And like they all come up with the same design, and it's just like picked off the end. It's like a sort of cheap WordPress like layout that they've seen on, you know, AI is seen online at the moment. But yeah, it remains to be seen. Like, I think there will be more decision makers. A bit what you just said, you know, rather than doers, there will be more decision makers, and
yeah,
which we are now. But I think some people get mixed in. Oh, I've not produced anything today. If you haven't physically produced the design, I think people will have to move on from that. Still believe that they are designers, even if they haven't physically gone into a production program and produced a physical design.
yeah.
I think if we think about UX research, UX design as being tasks, things that we do, a function, then that's something that's very easily absorbed and replicated by AI. If we think of UX as a practice, then that's much more about how do we guide the process. And I'm a big believer in thinking about user experience as an outcome, not a function, not a task. It's not we don't do UX. And I think we've kind of, as an industry, as a field, we've slipped into that kind of terminology that, we've got UX people who do UX. And I've heard a number of clients say, we've done the UX on that. It's like, well, what the hell does that mean? UX is an outcome. It's an experience that somebody has when they interact with a product or service. And our job as UX professionals is how do we shape that based on evidence to be the best possible experience.
I think also an example that I think Abi mentioned about this company that didn't want to delegate, the creativity because that's what they do. And what is it that humans do? Are we going to delegate creativity? Whether that's creativity, not necessarily in the artistic sense, but anything that we create, are we just going to delegate that to a machine? Are we going to be happy with that? I mean, I think it's, I think you can't force humans to delegate some things. We're going to create something else, or we need something else to kind of be human.
And I heard somebody say, don't delegate the tasks where you find joy, or you love, or there's a human nuance, or if you're a senior manager and you have to weigh up lots of different nuanced decisions, you can't delegate, not at the moment anyway, you can't delegate any of that.
Yeah, there's that bit as well, looking 10 years into the future, where
10?
you get to the point where the LLMs are filled with stuff produced by other LLMs, and you completely lose the humanity in the approach, and that's creativity is the word. I don't honestly believe that the machines are capable of true creativity.
It's also, as a designer, you're trying to solve a very unique problem that the AI doesn't understand and can't see into it. It could probably help automate general tasks, repetitive tasks for a designer, like not decision making.
Conscious of time, because people have to get their kayaks home.
Thank you.
So, any final thoughts, questions, comments? Nope, doesn't look like it. So all I can do is thank Abi, Steve and Snigdha for, I think, a really interesting and engaging panel. So thanks to all three of you.